these theme park trends could impact your haunt. That's coming up on today's show. Welcome to the show. I'm Philip. On the HAN show, we bring you the news and insights you need to prepare for Halloween. This podcast is just one part of what we do. Our free weekly email newsletter rounds up every story, video, and podcast in one place. You'll find the sign-up link on our website and in the show notes. Today, you'll hear the full audio from my recent guest appearance on the Fearworm Wormhole show with Tyler Barnett, Operations Director and Partner at Fearworm. We unpack Universal's new FanFest nights, its gamble with Dark Universe, and the rise of off-season activations like music festivals and summer slasher events. You'll hear how IP partnerships, luxury tier VIP add-ons, and even tariff pressures on materials can reshape your pricing and value proposition this fall. Plus, tactics for leveraging local brands when Hollywood licenses feel out of reach. The Fearworm Wormhole streams live every other Friday on Facebook. The link to the Facebook page is in the show notes as well if you'd like to join the next session. Okay, let's dive in.
Happy Friday, everybody! And it's a weird one because we have back-to-back wormholes. We had one last week, and now we're here today. How are you? I have a special episode for you today. Joining me on this wonderful conversation about theme parks and how it impacts haunted houses is none other than Philip Hernandez from the Haunt Network. Philip, how the hell are you on this Friday?
I'm here. I'm alive. I got a little barely recovered from East Coast, but I made it.
I understand. I have this, we had a haunted house commercial shoot, I guess a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. I got sick after it, and I feel like I have just this lingering cough. So apologies in advance if I have to cough up on this wormhole. And it's just, I feel fine. It's just, there's this cough and it won't go away.
Yeah.
But no, so on today's wormhole, let's talk about, Philip, and this is why you're here. I wanted to pick your brain about the amusement park, theme park business, some trends that we are seeing in that industry and how that may impact the haunted house industry.
All right. I'm ready.
It's a heady topic.
So much.
So I guess, Philip, let me ask you this right now. What are things you're noticing that just top line could be impacting haunts that you're seeing it already impacting the amusement park business?
So before we get into like too many of the trends stuff, I'm going to start off because I was just working on stuff for FanFest nights. So it's like literally like on the top of my brain. I was like literally like editing it I was editing the real version last night, which is like taking our like 25-minute overview and trying to make it into like 2.5 minutes somehow. Gotcha. I had to like re-record the intro or the voiceover because I was like, this voiceover is not going to cut it. So I actually think that this is one of those things that has like so much potential for haunts. And I'm surprised that nobody really is talking about it in that way. I think you get all the like normal like vloggers have done their videos, but I'm like, look guys, like Halloween Horror Nights is the most successful Halloween event in the world, like by far. And I think that if you remember, that used to be a shoulder season, you know, that Halloween season used to be a shoulder, like remember back in the day, that used to be a shoulder season. And it's true that Universal didn't start it, but Universal has helped us because they have made the awareness of a haunt event. It's like Universal is like the gateway drug for a lot of
right.
You know, they do marketing all globally and they market this Halloween haunt attraction thing and it gets people more aware of it, which, you know, helps all of us. So they've helped us grow the market share, but they've also turned that shoulder season into a big profit maker. And basically they're like, the other big time shoulder season is like right now. We're in it right now. It's right after the spring break before the season. So you've got this like month of dead window. And they're like, what if we can do Halloween Horror Nights again? Another Halloween Horror Nights. And I think that could be enormous because it also could open up. It's like they're doing the hard work already of trying to take like a horror brand and being like, hey, we also can do this. And if they can do that, I think it could really, that's like half the battle for the haunts. As you know, is the brand idea of like, how does a horror brand, you know, do non-Halloween stuff? It's harder in America because we're so focused on, you know, we want to silo Halloween for the haunt season, but
Right.
horror is year round. So they're trying, and then they're like, also fandoms are year round. So it's like, I think that is like, the potential there is huge because I think it could give haunts the coverage and to really open up for spring events and do spring things. And there's two examples actually that are like, so we just posted this article on this one that I just posted on the website that Ashley sent me. But there's Fright Nights in West Virginia is doing a Final Cut Summer Slaughter event. And it's kind of like, I think it's very similar to FanFest Nights where like the guests like walk through scenes and they have to like, they're challenged to like trying to make it out of a slasher, but it's very much like you have a role, you play a role, you get to take photos, you get to do slasher stuff. Like it's really fun that way, which I think is a great idea. And then, Field of Screams is doing a music festival, right? And then
I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. Then they're opening the haunts and also doing the music festival.
Right.
And I'm like, that is a great idea. Like it's because they already have the asset. They already have the band there. I mean, like,
yeah, if you have the property, I know. So the past couple of years, for those who don't know, there has been a music festival or like an EDM festival at Fear Factory in Salt Lake City.
Yep.
They have the venue. They've got the big building and tower. They have area to set up a stage, all the craziness. So I think you're right. I think you're right on with this of how can we look to this event that's a Universal's doing? How can we interpret that for ours and get people? And sometimes it is doing more than just your haunt. I think Field of Screams has a great idea with the music festival and all that, but they're also kind of side opening haunts. And, part of that, I think, also stems from there's a heavy metal festival that travels around called Knotfest.
Yeah.
Part of Knotfest, like the back end where the vendors are, is a haunted house. It's a traveling haunted house. That's part of the experience.
So it fits together. There's precedent, like what you're saying, there's precedent. It fits together.
Yeah.
And I think that's like that again, it's showing. I think the assets you talked about, like Salt Lake City, I know they do a great event there and they have a huge area there where they can hold a lot of people. And the asset is also the same thing Universal's doing, because the main part of FanFest Nights is the Back to the Future Destination Hill Valley experience. Yeah. And I did write like a thing, like an article with like charts where I was like, was it a good idea to do Dungeons and Dragons and Star Trek instead of doing anime? And I would argue it was not a good idea, but that's a different show. And there's a lot of arguments. But basically I was like, I feel like somebody on this team did not do their like basic research, and here's all the reasons why it would have made more sense and way more money to do it the other way. But anyway, Back to the Future was the main thing. And that is taking an asset that they have and just reusing, because they have, you're taking on the trams over to the back lot where you're on the scene from the movie, the courthouse square, and they've turned it basically into Sleep No More meets Back to the Future. So it's a 45-minute looping experience and you get to follow the characters and interact with them. But they already had the asset. They didn't rebuild the square or the clock tower, right? They did add items and they did help, make it, but it's not like they built that whole thing. And that's what you're saying with that Fear Factory is doing as well, because you have the stage already, Field of Screams is doing this. You have the thing already. It's how do you figure this out to bring people into it and monetize it in a different way that's not just about your haunted house.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And that kind of, a question popped in my head for you. And I've thought about this. I've been thinking about this for a long time. Some haunts, I know there are some experiences that already do this, but part of that draw to FanFest or to the music festivals is that, unfortunately, I guess I'm trying to think of the nice way of putting this, but like haunted houses as a brand, they're just not as big as we think they are.
Oh, yeah.
And so when you have these music festivals, like you almost need the artist to be that draw, to have that brand. At what point, Philip, do you see haunts, and I know some have already done this, but stemming out and actually getting the rights or paying for rights to use, movie IP or comic IP or some type of IP to then create an experience around? Because right now, the only thing I can think of commercially is Halloween Horror Nights. or
Yeah.
what Six Flags did at Fright Fest yet last year, which I would call a failure, but
I would too. Yeah.
It's but like kind of going that route.
Yeah, that's funny because you and I would call that a failure, but I feel like they thought it was a success, and also RWS thought it was a success because they like use it as their main marketing point to sell, Legoland. So that was a thing. So that's an interesting question, and I think the answer is the thing that's holding it back is actually the haunters, because I think haunters want to do their haunts. Right. I mean, that's a simple thing. I mean, you look at like the people that are serious about business, like Spencer. I mean, that's why they're doing the music. I mean, I think that's a big piece of it, because look at Jason Egan over in Vegas. Right. So Jason, I think, has probably been the most successful at non-horror IP because he built the John Wick experience. And this is a haunter. This is a guy who started in haunted houses, and then he did the It experience, and he did the Blair Witch Project, and he did like even a horror pizza shop. I mean, he's like been all about horror, and then he's like, look, Universal is coming to my backyard with Horror Unleashed, and I know that I'm not gonna be able to compete against that. So what I'm gonna do instead is do follow the opportunity that they're creating by coming into the market. So they're coming in with a horror IP that's like this, whatever. And he's like, so I'm going to make an adventure-based action IP experience that complements it. And, I think, but in his case, he likes horror. Like, I know he likes, I think that's the bigger problem, I think, is that the haunters, that's what they want to do. And so, like with Hush is another example. They're doing like a tiki event at the bar for the summer. And it's like, it has nothing to do with horror. Right. But I think it's more that the haunters are holding it back, because anybody, especially now that Licensing Expo has announced so many partnerships with the TEA and with the Theme Entertainment Association, Theme Entertainment Industry, and they have, dedicated areas to them, it's pretty easy for a haunter to get a license to something. So I think it's more just about that they don't really want to make experiences that are not tied to horror.
Yeah, I think part of that's also you just don't realize the value an IP can have. It's like
even Universal doesn't realize it, in my opinion. But
no, that's exactly right. When we hear it all the time of like, oh, how come we're not seeing these numbers, but such and such is like, well, their brand is bigger and better. The brand has more power, has more draw. It's like, of course, looking at Fearworm and even our our company Red Rock, when you're looking at an advertising budget for say Metallica versus an advertising budget for Nickelback.
Yeah.
Nickelback probably spends more. They probably have to.
Yeah.
With Metallica, you can just make a post and you'll sell out. It's just like that's the power of their draw, of their brand. Yeah. Unfortunately, that's not Fear Factory. That's not Netherworld. And so you almost you have to keep in mind, like with these off-season shows or these fan fest type shows, or like we're talking about, at what point do the haunters say, hey, I want to go license Hellraiser and build a Hellraiser experience based off the movie IP? How much of a draw would that be?
Yeah. I think looking at the chat here, I think Robert, first of all, Robert, yes, editing is 90% of my life recently. But I think Robert has a good point here. He says, I think the majority of haunts see getting an IP as different level, maybe like a brass ring that they can't reach. I do think, and that's, I think, similar to maybe to what Tyler is also saying in part of Tyler's response there, I think, is that idea of like, it's out of reach. I would say it's not as out of reach as you think, really. And I think that you need to approach it maybe with two lenses. One is you can, haunters are themed entertainment designers, basically. And I think that one way for a haunt to approach it is to look at putting together a pop-up project or some sort of project and work with someone to get funding and then approach the IP. That is people, that's pretty common. I think we see it all the time where people, they basically you're just like an experienced designer and you're working to create that. But then of course there's approaching them directly, which is an option if you're trying to put it at your location. But it's not as inaccessible as you think, especially if you're able to get some funding. And this is something like Spencer is huge, like great with, like getting funding from Rockstar to work on their bar, a couple seasons ago. I think, there's, you could get somebody to get funding to do it as a outside your event, or you could try and put it on your property and get funding from somebody else, or you could just approach them if you have the budget to put together, do it on your own. That's also a opportunity. Also, you can think more local, and this is what, when we do our Green Tag newsletter, and we talked about this in a newsletter, is the takeaway of like, there are also local celebrities. And I think that's also speaking to what you're mentioning, Tyler. It's like different IPs, have different reach in different regions. And I definitely think there are local IPs. So there's definitely like local celebrities and local things that you could do a deal with. And I just think you could think of that on any level. Like you could do something with even a local college or a local high school if they have a big thing, or you could do it with like a local brand of beer or a local brand of energy drink if they have a popular place there. And I mean, like I think that's the thing that Horror Nights also unlocked for all of us, which is, and also shout out to Chris Stafford at 13th Floor, because they also did this. And I think they get talked about a lot less, although I would argue it's probably harder for them. But both of these places, 13th Floor and Universal, they built a bridge for all of us between horror and music, right? So we saw it where multiple times, the Horror Nights has featured a music artist that isn't a horror artist. And then in last year's at LA Haunted Hayride, there also was a haunt based off of a music artist that wasn't just a horror artist. Right. And you saw that with The Weeknd, and then you saw that also with LA Haunted Hayride. And so I think that's another like article or another option is like, it does, you can take something that is not horror and like you can make it horror also. And that can help you when you're trying to lean in locally to things you can do locally, to like local celebrities or with local brands. Again, if you don't have the budget or you don't have the interest in putting together an investment or doing something larger.
Yeah, I think you have a great point, especially with the local brands. As an example, if you're in Chicago, and it doesn't have to be like music or movies, it could be food and beverage. If you're in Chicago, if I had an event in Chicago, I'm going to try to partner with Lou Malnati's to sell pizza at my event. Yeah. Because that's a local beloved pizza place, and what haunted event doesn't sell pizza by the slice? It's just like, to me, it's a great partnership. I think this kind of is one of those things we see a lot in the theme parks that I think over time is slowly trickling into haunt space, thanks to people like 13th Floor or Jason Egan, things like that, just kind of bringing this horror IP. What can we do? And Philip, you hit it right on the head. That haunt owners and operators are really just themed attraction specialists, like designers and builders. Yeah. And so they're almost already primed to create really cool experiences if they just had an IP to work with. Another question I have for you, and this might be a heady topic. I know we discussed bringing this up maybe a little later, and I don't want this to get political, but I know
like anytime somebody says that, and you're like, oh God, here we go.
But at what point? So I know right now a big fear in the economy and everything is tariffs. I know IAAPA has been putting out. As long with you, Philip, with the Haunt Network, I've been putting out information regarding how tariffs are going to impact their industry, the amusement theme park industry, or how immigration may affect employment, in the employment industry. There are people in the haunt industry that say tariffs don't have any impact on haunts. But I wanted to start this conversation of how tariffs could impact these shows and events, and what's the reality of that the amusement parks are saying that, like everything else, will eventually trickle down to haunted houses and smaller events.
Wait, what specifically did Larry say? I'm kidding. Yeah, I think in my view, there's no way it's not going to impact haunted houses. But I think that haunted houses at the same time are also pretty insulated, relatively insulated. I mean, it's the same thing with like, if you look at recessionary time period, like people still like haunted houses. It's the whole idea of escapism because, you're like going to go into something that's like supposed to be, it's like you live in a real life that's scary. So you want to go into like a fictional scary and it helps you like kind of, decompress. So I think that for the most part, haunts are pretty resilient. I also think that haunters are haunters, and haunters being haunters, like, if they need to, they can go to the local dump and turn a pile of trash into a haunt. I mean, they can figure it out, right? I think, and that's
we know those haunters.
yes. Like, I think in a way they are. I think if you look at it, in my take as also being a manufacturer and being so close to it, tariffs are going to impact every part of the economy, like every possible layer of everything in America, and so I think in that vein, you have people that there's going to be winners and losers, just like everything. And, it's probably going to be pretty tough for Amazon, but I think haunters probably are in one of the best positions for it. And there is an opportunity here if they could navigate to it. The opportunity is that you look around to see what your competition, and I don't mean other haunts. I mean, by competition, I mean like Netflix, right? If the Hollywood thing goes through, Netflix might have to raise prices, there's all that. But also you look at movie theaters, you look at the competition that haunts have, look at your local market. What else are people spending their time on? If you're able to keep your pricing the same, or even do stuff that adds value, not necessarily lower your ticket prices, but add value, add perceived value to your event, you could come in at a time where everything else is getting more expensive, and that could help you capture market share. And
I agree.
Yeah, so I think there's an opportunity. So I don't want to be like all crazy negative about it. I think there's a great opportunity that haunts, if they navigate it like consciously. You can't. I mean, I think just sitting back doing nothing is not what I would advise. I would advise looking at what's going on and making a plan to kind of navigate it. But I think, I'm sure haunters already thought of this, but the main things, obviously, it's going to be cost of materials. Like, I know that a lot of haunters make their stuff, but it's cost of materials. And I do also want to point out that, like, yes, it's cost materials. So even if you make like you do your own fabricating, or you do whatever you do, like literally anything that you do, the materials are going to become more expensive. But I think also, to me, the biggest risk, there are two big risks. And one is the risk to our small manufacturers. Small businesses make up, I think, the majority of the haunt industry. And, you just think of like all of the small people, like, I mean, and I think a lot of them have done a good job. Like, RibFX has said they're going to try and keep prices the same, even though, they're paying so much more for items. We have Brandy Beast, who's talking about telling people, like, order your fur now because she's being transparent. This is how much fur I have left. This is what we're doing. I think that's great, but I think that's more where we should be worried, is about protecting the independent businesses and, making sure that we support them if we can, to make sure they're still around, or that, they can weather, because the big difference here is like, the tariff plan might change, it might go away, it might be adjusted, however, the administration sees fit will, whatever they want to do, it'll change. Right. But like, I think bigger businesses will be fine because they have cash and they can take loans. In the independent haunt businesses, probably the loans are more dangerous for them, and they are smaller. They have less runway. I mean, we talked about this at Gantom. I only have 2 or 3 months of runway, and that's like that may not be enough depending on how the sales are impacted and all that. So I think that's one of the two big things. And the other thing also that I referenced earlier is also like, then it trickles down to your local market, and some markets are going to be affected more than others in terms of like, if you're in an area where people are being laid off, or if you're in an area where they have less disposable income, that could impact you. But I think in either of these cases, what I said at the beginning will hold true. I mean, if you're trying to add more value, but try and keep your pricing in the range of what the people can afford, I think that they'll find a way, to pay for tickets to come to your haunt. And then obviously you can balance out, you can look at your budget and say, okay, well, we're going to really support this vendor, so we're going to buy this thing from them, but maybe we're going to make these other things ourselves. And
Right.
or we're gonna, instead of making too many new things, we're gonna buy this one thing and then we're gonna add in more acting, or we're gonna expand this area, or we're gonna do this extra thing, or whatever. There are ways, I think, for haunts really to combat it in ways that other industries can't. And so I think in that way they're in a really good place.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I think haunters sometimes don't realize how much of the, like you said, a lot of these haunters, they make a lot themselves and they're great at it.
Yeah.
But how much of those materials actually do come from overseas?
Like
even your
almost
lumber,
everything, like almost any material that a haunt is using.
even your wood and lumber is coming from Canada.
Yeah, like everything. I don't know, like that to me too is also puzzling. I think maybe they don't know how much it's going to go up, or whatever. It's like, I of course I think the haunt should look at their budgets again and look at their materials. I mean, makeup. I mean, there's so much of that stuff too. It's going to your makeup costs are going to go up. All of I don't know about fog. I have no idea. I didn't talk to Froggies, but I don't know if fog's going to be impacted or not. But
yeah, I mean, I don't know if they're sourcing glycerin and things like that from the U.S. or from overseas. Like you never know. But even then, the plastic containers the fog goes in, probably comes from overseas.
Yeah, it's like I think the haunt also should be paying attention to that, looking at their consumables for the season in the same way that you would look at your staffing schedule and look at, that kind of stuff. Your consumables for the season are probably going to go up. So that's going to take a bigger percentage of your budget.
Oh, Robert's mentioning that the fog machines already went up.
Yeah, I thought so. Cause I think we talked a little bit at the East Coast show about that and how they were trying to lock in orders before prices, change. But yeah, fog machines go up.
Yeah. And, I'm just thinking just now, my brain is kind of going down the rabbit hole of like everything, even the little LED lights, like you mentioned with Gantham,
Yeah.
It's like, of course I don't work in that industry. I can't say it's one benefit of us being who we are is that we don't produce anything physical. When people hire us, they're paying for this. They're paying for my brain and my time.
That's also going to become a thing too. We're already seeing it, right? We're seeing like places, America is a service economy. We export services. We're really great at exporting services. We're great at exporting entertainment, but you're already seeing people turn away from that. So I don't think that'll impact haunters necessarily because there are very few of them that are like actively pitching international clients on doing horror projects, overseas. But,
we've had people come talk to us, people from Switzerland or from Germany, or it's like, hey, are you all able to do this or do this? Some things we can, and some things we can't.
Yeah.
In the marketing world, it's like, there are tactics and things that we can do here that are illegal overseas.
Oh yeah.
For better or for worse, it is what it is, But
what are privacy laws? I don't know.
Yeah, I know. What's privacy?
Yeah. There's a lot of good conversation in the chat here. Yeah, Robert's adds that. Yeah, the fog machines went up on May 1st. Yeah, Zombie Skins is said they're going to keeping it the same. Yeah, I think that's also. I'm happy that we have so many vendors that are really trying to keep it the same, but I also worry about their businesses too because, you can only survive so long on giving your margin away. And I just hope that I think as a community, we need to protect each other. We need to stick up for each other. And that's really what more I think the angle we need to take is being making sure that all of us are getting through.
Now, Robert mentioned that, say Zombie Skin, they're kind of trying to keep everything the same.
Yeah.
And you mentioned something earlier kind of along those lines that I'm going to hit you with a comment. I want to get your feedback on it. But would you say that right now is the absolute worst time to try and raise ticket prices for your event?
I don't think so. I think I don't even know who is how many, I don't think that many haunts are putting out tickets. I also don't think that people are really paying that much attention to haunts. You don't have there are whole forums dedicated to tracking the price of the Home Depot Halloween stuff. Right. I don't think that there really is going to be that many that's tracking your haunt. So in that way, we always complain about how, we have to do all this work to get the attention, sell the ticket and all that. But in this way, it might be a benefit because I don't think people are going to be looking at your stuff with a microscope. As far as I know, the only person that tracks prices in the industry is me. So I,
Yeah, we only we track only a little bit because clients will ask us,
Yeah.
what do you think? I personally think it's a bad time to raise prices right now, and it's only because
but would they even know? I mean, like,
well, that's
how
the
would they
thing is
even
like
know?
we do know that people will have multiple haunted house websites open and
Yeah.
comparing just locally. Like, oh, if we're going to a haunted house, let's look at the three of these and
Yeah.
compare. So and price always wins out. The price and value proposition always wins out. And so it's like, is it the best thing for a haunt to keep prices the same, but like you said, maybe do something that increases that value proposition to
Yeah.
win that battle?
Yeah. I mean, but I don't think people are comparing right now is my point. Like, I don't
Yeah,
think
no,
anybody-
right now they're not.
That's why I'm saying where I'm like, I mean, right now in like halfway to Halloween, might be a good time, or you could pitch it where, I mean, you could do the opposite. I think we saw this. I mean, we were just at East Coast, and there were haunts that were there promoting their haunt and selling tickets and talking about their stuff. I think I think that selling tickets now, like guaranteeing this price, could be also a strategy for people, is to kind of be like, we're going to have our old pricing for this year if you're buying now or whatever. I mean, I don't think people are comparing haunt prices like currently right now. So I think if there was a time you wanted to cover to do it, now probably is a good time. It might hurt you, as your point, in the haunt season if your biggest competitor didn't raise prices, so it might hurt you at that time.
Right.
But you could counterbalance that with value proposition, revalue proposition stuff, or by doing stuff where you're rewarding your best customers, right? Do your legacy pricing or whatever to those people.
Right. Let me get your opinion on this. I have heard from a few people, not in the haunt industry. This is just outside haunt industry, other entertainments and parks and things, is that they are worried about their Q3 event sales, which is the fall, which is Halloween. Because generally the populace doesn't have as much spending power as they did a few years ago. And the reality of them saving money for Christmas is going to impact Q3 sales. How does that impact the haunted houses?
I think it's very similar to what we said previously also. But I do want to kind of like take a step back and look at a little bit larger theory. We did an episode on this a few weeks ago, but basically we were looking at what can United Airlines' earnings and their travel spend tell us about, where travel is going. And I think it's important for haunters or business people to understand the difference between trailing indicators and leading indicators. Okay, if you were looking right now at Disney's their recent earnings call, I think that's a bad thing to look at because it's a trailing indicator. Okay, they're reporting on like the last quarter. Okay, and things happen very quickly, this year, and so I think looking at trailing indicators can get you like looking at the wrong data, and so that's why we like to look at things that are leading indicators. So look at like what's going on with purchases for airline tickets, right? What's going on for purchases for other tourism experiences. So that's why we looked at those things. And I think like if you look at the United purchases and what they're looking at, I think you do kind of see a pattern that basically breaks up into, I kind of called it a barbell. So you're looking at like there's lots of interest in budget and there's also a lot of interest in luxury. And then if you think about kind of the American vanishing middle class, that kind of makes sense. And so I think haunts can look at trends like that. It's going to be hard to predict Q3 at this point, but I think if you look at those leading indicators, things like how sales are doing with those items and how spending is being impacted, all that, I think you can make some predictions. But my overall trend is what I'm seeing is that like you should be aware of that barbell, which is back to the idea of like, having different values at your haunt, but being very aware of the budget constraints. And I think that's where the value thing comes in. And I think though, at the same time, I think haunts definitely can choose. I don't know how many of them it would work for them to choose luxury. Like, I don't know if they like how many of them can.
Right.
Disney can, obviously, but I think I'm not sure about which haunts can do that. But I'm just saying, like, I think value is going to be increasingly a big part of the conversation. What's it worth? Is it really worth it? Blah, blah. And then I also think there's going to be a growing market for luxury because, we have the biggest growing demographic is millionaires in America. And so there's still like a whole ecosystem. There's a whole thing for luxury. And I think Disney probably is, trying to hone in on that particular market because I was thinking just even recently, like the Star Wars nights, I was like $180 a ticket for Star Wars nights. And it's like 4 hours. And then you have to do parking on top of that, which is $35. And you have to it's crazy. Like I was like, if Disney didn't give me a free ticket, I would never have gone to that. That's crazy. But like, I think that's, and then you compare that again with FanFest nights. And again, we see this same thing, literally right here.
Those events are selling out.
Yeah. So FanFest nights, it's like if you're already in the parks, we have like an annual pass, you can upgrade for $50 to FanFest nights, and it's open till 2. So you get from like 7 to 2.
Yeah.
And you get to do the Back to the Future, you get to do Dungeons and Dragons, you get to do Star Trek, and you get to do there's live bands, there's like cosplay, and there's like enough entertainment to keep you until 2 a.m. Okay. Star Wars nights in the same market, like literally like an hour down the road, there's Star Wars nights, and it's 4 hours and it's 180 plus parking. And there's like not really a discount. There's like a $5 discount for pass holders. So like, I think this is exactly what I'm talking about. It's like,
well, how much was the FanFest ticket if you weren't in the park already?
I think it's 74 or 78 in that range. So,
oh wow, okay, yeah, so it's a deal.
Yeah, it's again, that's the thing. You compare it, you're like, it's $100 less than Star Wars Night, and it's like almost twice as long,
right?
And there's actual attractions. Like Star Wars Night is literally just like there's not even like a cavalcade there or a parade. There's like the fans all do their own parade, like you are the performer, like you're the parade.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So like, it's great. Like, I mean, I enjoyed Star Wars nights. I think that it's fun to dress up and do all that. But I mean, I think this is exactly what we're looking at in these markets is this bifurcation where you're like, just like your point where you're like, the people are comparing them. I mean, if you compare them, to me, it's a pretty easy choice, but also I'm poor. So maybe there's like, I'm just saying, right? Yeah. Like, I mean, I think that's getting to what we're talking about here. I think there's going to be this bifurcation. So I think the haunts should just be mindful of that bifurcation too. Like there is an opportunity also to hit the luxury market. I'm not sure how many haunts can do that or.
Well, a great example I always think of is Dark Hour here in Dallas.
Yeah.
Well, technically Plano, but the DFW area.
They have VIP services, right?
Their VIP packages are great because they have a dedicated room, has drinks and snacks. You get a tour guide. It's like they could totally offer that VIP premium experience at their haunted house, but while also offering at the exact same time their cheaper discounted tickets to hit both those crowds.
Yep. Yeah. I think that's going to be a fundamental pricing for this season is going to be figuring out, doing your analysis and blah, 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 but also being like, okay, is there opportunity for luxury? And then understanding where in that budget range, your demographic is falling. But either way, it's going to be leaning into that value. And I just think like, I think what Universal did well with FanFest Nights was make the value proposition so high. Like, come on, like
that's a really hard. That value proposition is very high.
Yeah, like I'm not even sure. Like, I mean, that is like for $50 to get from.
Is it even profitable at that point? It's just like, are they even covering payroll?
I mean, it's crazy. I have no idea. I'm just like, that is nuts. And that you could just go through. You could stay down there in Back to the Future for just like hours.
Yeah.
You could watch all the different characters, or you could go and do the live bands, or you could watch the cosplayers. You could get character. I mean, like until 2 in the morning. Like what on earth? Like,
yeah.
I think I give them a lot of shit for their event because I think that I came up with like a formula that was able to compare. It's like a weighted average. It was like global reach versus local ticket sales for the IP. And then I put that weighted average together, and then I ranked all the IPs, and like the ones they did experiences for were at the bottom of the list. And I was like, you should have kept Back to the Future, but taken D&D and Star Trek and made them like one piece, you know, or something else. And, you know, so I do give them shit to that, but the value proposition, there's no,
that's massive. Yeah.
For like in LA for $50, and especially if you already have parking, like a pass number, like I get free parking. So it's truly $50 for me. Like I could just show up and park for free. I mean, like I paid $35 for parking for an event recently. So I'm like, this is crazy. I don't know. It's still crazy.
No, those are all great points. And I think, you know, being aware, being conscientious of, especially if you're in a market, say like in LA or Chicago or in New York, Atlanta, and New Orleans, you know, these major markets, or even Salt Lake City, where that bifurcation may be greater. There may be more disparity between, like you said, more millionaires and the peasants below them. Yeah. You know, and so you may be forced to think about these things in your pricing structure. Yeah. You know, if you're in, as an example, if you're in Mobile, Alabama, probably not that big of a swing factor. No, if you're in Chicago, New York, LA, those markets, way more. Yeah.
And I think that there's definitely, especially in LA, there's plenty of events where they can only sell to luxury. Yeah. You know, I don't really recommend that for a lot of haunts. Like you said, I think it's very market dependent, but I know it is a thing that in the larger markets where you know, I mean, even back when Scott was doing it, his event there in Tampa was pretty luxury. I mean, it was like $120. Yeah. The minimum ticket was $120, you know, and that's pretty luxury. I mean, I think for Tampa, that's pretty up there. So, you know, it does, that is also a strategy that you could do. Although you might argue that like Star Cruiser disproved that it's sustainable, but.
You know, that's exactly right. You know, when all that was happening and they announced the pricing on it, I was like,
yeah, that was crazy.
This will not last. You know, yeah.
I'm shocked it sold so many, which I think is just shows their pricing power. But I literally was like shocked. I was like, I thought about it. I was like, is there any way I could afford this? And I was like, no, this is crazy.
Yeah, you know, and we did it's all of this thinking, you know, for April Fools, you know, a month ago for Fear Factory, we kind of did a joke where you could there's an overnight, you could stay the night at Fear Factory and a ticket was $30,000 or something stupid. But it's like, how much of that really like could be done, you know?
I think there was something back here. There's a comment back here from Into the Fear a while back up.
Let me find it for you. I got it right here.
Yeah, this in my opinion. Yeah. So looking at this one, I think I agree with this, but I do want to just point out the perspective where and this might be something haunts could like also consider in some of their stuff. It's the concept of an MVP, right? Like what's the minimum viable product? And I think sometimes like, you know, there's no way around it. Like the parks are the people that make money on Halloween. Haunts, some haunts make money, right? Some don't, but like parks make a lot of money. And I think, you know, it's not necessarily they don't care about the experience. It's more like they're looking at like, what is the minimum that we need? Like, you know, what makes it viable? And I think that's understanding their audience, understanding like how much the audience, you know, there's always going to be the diehard fans that will, you know, notice every single detail in the haunt, but you know, the majority of them like just don't like,
you know, so. This brings up a great another point of discussion. You know, Into the Fear mentions the wow factor versus like a creative factor or something. Yeah. And a great testament to this, and what will be a great test of how much the general public love or appreciate horror, is at Epic Universe, the new Universal Park opening in Orlando at the end of May. There's a whole land called Dark Universe that is horror themed, you know, and I think to me that is their biggest risk in that whole park. Dark Universe is the riskiest part of the whole plan. And what are your thoughts on that? Like, is this another great example that adds to the list of like Stranger Things or these cheap, like Terrifier, these horror movies that make so much money? You know, is this going to be another test of how much horror can the general public stomach on a year-round basis?
You know, it's interesting. I really want to know. I really want to see the data that Universal sees, or like see how they're, you know, what data they're making these decisions based off of. I think that the monsters, you know, the horror part of Universal definitely has legs. It's definitely a popular component, and it's interesting that how they chose to do that at Dark Universe, or they're basically like trying to invent kind of new characters instead of going with like, you know, the stuff they're actually know. That's the interesting thing. And same thing with Horror Unleashed. You know, they're trying that in Vegas, and I don't think, you know, they say those are that the IPs at Horror Unleashed are their most exciting IPs. I am like, what are you guys smoking? Because if it were me, I'm not going to travel to that. Like, you know, I wouldn't travel to that because I've already seen it. But if it was Five Nights at Freddy's, I would be there, right? You know, and I think that's the thing. So I just it's strange to me that they're doing in that way. And I think the only thing I can possibly think of is they must be trying to test what you're talking about, where they're like, okay, if we just have our regular IPs, you know, how much demand can they kind of generate in a year-round fashion, you know, and what, because they own them, right? So I mean, you know, obviously it would be the best case scenario for them if they were able to kind of monetize these IPs year round, because then they could, you know,
I think they realize it's also the riskiest part of that whole park because it's the smallest of the lands.
Which probably is also why they did the most advanced dark ride there, you know, where they're basically like, this ride's going to be something that everyone has to see because it's so incredible. And so it doesn't matter really if it's IP or not. And I think that my only thing, and I think you saw this with FanFest nights too, my only argument against that is like, you're polluting your own data, basically, right? So I think like with FanFest nights, Scott and I talked about this on our podcast. It's like the Back to the Future experience there, like, is so incredible. If you like Back to the Future at all, like, you have to go. But it's also in its own way, it's skewing the data, and I think that also might be what is happening with Dark Universe, because the ride is so good.
Yeah,
everyone has to do it. So now it's like, is it because the ride is good, or is it because it's horror?
Right.
And now your data's muddy, and so you don't really know. Like, we still don't really know like how much sticking power, or how much, you know, monetization that power they have for horror. So I think what they might have been doing is they might have been trying to test it, but also mitigate it at the same time. But what that did is muddy their data. Right. So like now we really don't know. Like at FanFest last week, like we really don't know. Like, you know, if they had rebalanced the portfolio of the IPs or whatever, or like we don't really know how much sticking power it has because they muddied their data, and they leaned way more into nostalgia than in popularity. And so now, is this a nostalgia event or is it a fandom event like they claim? And,
right.
You know, and same thing with the Epic Universe. Like, yeah, they put the horror there, but you have to go do that ride if you're visiting the park. And so they muddied their data. So I'm not sure we're ever going to know. I'm kind of like, you know, I think maybe with Horror Unleashed, we'll figure out what's going on.
Yeah, I think that'll be the ultimate test. You know, and I know they're building Universal's building a kids park here in DFW. And it begs the question, will that kids family park eventually have a Halloween event? You know,
I doubt it.
I doubt it too, but
I doubt it.
If I were working in Universal Creative, I would at least ask the question, like, how could we pull that off?
I think they're going to do a trick or treat event. I don't think it's going to.
Well, yeah.
So there's a really interesting point here that Austin says, which I think this is a good opportunity. Yes, this one exactly. Like Tyler knows what I'm going to talk about. Says almost everyone who would go to HHN would spend significant time in Dark Universe. Here's the thing, though. So I did this when I looked at the comparison. Like, I think this is another thing. This is exactly I don't want to say the problem with haunters, but like, it's not a problem. This just shows you that we're in our own bubbles, and our bubble is Halloween and haunts because we love Halloween and horror and haunts. Okay, what if I told you only 3 to 7% of people that go to Universal go to horror nights?
Yeah, I knew that statistic.
Yeah,
and you're totally right because like.
Yeah, so it's actually.
I can go to my neighbor.
Like
I can go to my neighbor right now, and they would not be able to tell you a haunted house in town.
Yep.
You know, it's just like the vast majority of people do not think about Halloween until October 27th.
Yep.
You know, it's just like that's just how it is.
Yeah. So that's why it's such a liability, is because like it's actually like. We see it as like, oh my God, Halloween Horror Nights is the biggest event. And it is. That is also true. But it is also true that like 97% more people go to the actual theme park to do the other things than they do the horror night things. And it's that's why it's such a, that's why it's so skewed. That's also why doing year-round Halloween Horror Nights would make no sense. You know, that's why you have to think like, if we're going to do different events, where are they going to be? And that's also why you're looking at. That's also why I think the FanFest nights had more potential before they leaned into nostalgia, but it has the potential because they can tap into fandoms that are larger.
Yes,
like there are far more gamers in the world than there are anyone who's ever even thought about horror. Like it's just we're in this tiny microscopic thing, and like
that's why I think maybe you've alluded to that I don't think the Vegas property will do well, because like so Vegas is primarily gambling and conventions, trade shows, and so it's like how much of that audience has enough love of horror or even interest in horror to go do a horror only event. You know, me personally, I would much rather go see Penn and Teller or go see Adele or something like that than go to, you know, and I work in this space and I would much rather do those other things before I did that.
I think that's so curious. Again, I want to see the data. Like, how did they make this decision, and why did they choose to go with IPs that are like so boring? Like, why? Again, look at what's popular. And like, I hate to say this, folks, but like horror is not nearly as popular as gaming or as anime even. I mean, we did this comparison. You know, I when I did the chart we were looking at this whole thing, nostalgia and fandom and all that. And you look at Super Mario, 830 million games sold versus Back to the Future, which sold 833,000 tickets. So 830 million or 830,000?
Right.
I mean, this is the scale that you're thinking of. I mean, even if you were like, again, they're like, let's do a Super Mario haunt. I mean, come on, that would be like so much. Like, I think that the Five Nights at Freddy's is a great example. Like, if they had positioned Five Nights at Freddy's at Horror Unleashed, it would really change. It would change entirely. And maybe they will. Maybe that's one of their rotating IPs because they can't pay for it, for more than a month or something. They don't have the money, whatever. But I think the Vegas thing is such an interesting question about like, are they really going to or not? I mean, it's really going to be interesting to watch. The thing I don't appreciate about that, and I ranted about this extensively and got a lot of heat for it, so I guess I'll just do it again. But why not? They already hate me. I think TJ is excellent and TJ is great. The panel that I watched about when they talked about it at the TEA did not have TJ on it. And they basically were like, we're going to do what no haunt has ever done before. And he basically just sat up there and trashed haunted houses. And I did not appreciate that being in the industry, because if you were to believe Chris, you would believe that like every haunted house in America just dumps you out on a dangerous sidewalk street and none of them have anything called bars or themed experiences or midways or none of them know how to do story. They don't know how to do midways. They don't know how to do bars. They don't have any connected characters. They don't have any of these places to hang out or any of that. And I was like, this is so off base. And basically he was saying that since No Haunt in America has a midway, that they're going to make a midway and it's going to be revolutionary. And I'm like, that's wrong. So that's the biggest gripe I have so far with this is like, they have not said anything.
Well, I mean, and I think that would apply for Halloween Horror Nights. You know, I mean, there are areas where Halloween Horror Nights has kind of changed how I think event haunt owners should look at certain aspects of business, especially merch and food and beverage. If I were to take technology out of it, and that's a big if I were to take that out.
Yeah.
Halloween Horror Nights, the attractions have not revolutionized anything.
Yeah.
You know, if anything, they're just catching up.
They're doing the same thing over and over and
over.
Doing
the exact same thing. Yeah.
It's crazy. It might as well be animatronics. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Again, it's that idea, you know, I think Austin like kind of is referencing it here and is also his recent note, but like, I think, I think it's the idea of you're looking at, again, back to the MVP thing, like what is the minimum thing? I think that like Horror Nights, we all love to go again. That's the hard part about this is like, we're trying to like be, you know, but also we just love Horror Nights. Everyone I'm sure loves Horror Nights. They love to go, love the vibe, all that. But Tyler's right. Like if you look at it, like it's just the same thing over and over and over. And it's exactly what Austin's saying about the mass appeal. Like they're just doing the minimum. They're doing the minimum they can to sell the ticket. And, you know, sometimes that's okay. That's the business decision is to be like, what is the minimum that we need to do? We have a
product. It makes money. We make the money on merch and food and beverage.
Yes.
Let's just phone it in on the attractions. Keep in mind those and I had a friend text me I guess they were watching, but they texted me during the wormhole and said, can't compare it to the parks. They have rides and roller coasters.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I mean, that's also an argument you can make, but
exactly. Like that's another thing we got to keep in mind too. Like I did want to mention that too. It's like, it is also a little bit of a danger for us to compare ourselves to the theme parks and especially Comcast, because like I also just did a talk on Comcast, reviewing Comcast earnings on our last week's episode, the week before, whatever. I don't know. And they in last quarter alone, they generated $5 billion in cash, just free cash flow from their so the reason their stock dipped 4 points, even though they just literally are opening Epic Universe and everyone is saying it's great, the reason their stock dipped is because they lost 200,000 broadband subscribers, and broadband makes up the vast majority of their business, and it's very profitable, and it's very it's such a good cash cow product, but like it is shrinking. So the game for them is, can we grow market share in other businesses fast enough to deal with the shrinking thing? And Wall Street does not think they can, or thinks maybe, but maybe not. And it's like, that's an interesting perspective to also think about this. Like they're able to do this test in Vegas that for the haunters, you would have to spend a lot more time making a business plan that would guarantee success, which is kind of like what Jason is doing there with like Blair Witch and with the the John Wick experience that he just opened. Like that's why if you talk to those people, they're so intelligent about the business and thinking about like how are we really going to sell tickets and how is this going to work and all that. To a degree, Universal doesn't have to care because every quarter they're getting $5 billion that they can flush down the toilet. And so, we don't know how much Horror Unleashed costs. I did do a whole analysis where I tried to figure it out, but I can tell you it is not $5 billion, and so like they're in many ways, they're kind of like, I mean, you can just, it doesn't necessarily have to be a fully fleshed out business plan. We would hope that it would be, but it doesn't have to be because of the position they're in. If anything, Disney is in a worse position to be able to make bets on things.
Yeah.
That's also why Disney goes slower. And that's also why Disney the whole thing has to be figured out.
Yeah. They don't have a broadband product to sell to the market.
Exactly. Yeah, that they can then they don't have to, they can absorb
our love of the Universal parks is paid for by internet users.
Yeah.
and cable subscribers.
Yeah. And so it is true. Like it is hard to, I think that's what we have to also keep that perspective in mind is that as haunts, this is our whole thing and the business that we're doing with our haunt has to work. And we can admire the theme parks and all of us are fans of them, but that's not kind of their only business is the thing that we see. So I think our business plans have to be a little bit more thought out. So it's almost like trying to, sometimes I swear, I'm like, we're sitting here trying to figure out why they did this and their insight on that and all this and that. But like the reality is it's possible that they just don't even bother, that they're just like, well, this might work. Let's test it. And we have money, so let's do it.
Yeah.
So
yeah, when you have a $5 billion cash flow, opening up a $30 million attraction is nothing. It's a drop in the bucket. I mean, 30 million compared to 5 billion is nothing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the perspective that we have to always, so the friend that texted you is true in that like it's hard. You got to keep your perspective. But where I would argue is I still think that there are things you can look at, the big trends, like the ideas that you can take from it, that you can be like, okay, it is important to think about what your MVP is. Is this thing that you're putting into haunt really going to sell tickets is the question. And I think you can take that away from what they're doing. You can take the concept of, does opening in the spring, does that work at all? You can take that concept and you could test it. Right. There are things you can take from it.
Does licensing an IP bring a benefit to me and to my customers and provide value?
Yeah.
That's a great summary. We're at the hour, folks. So
we are.
Yeah, I know. I know. And this is kind of a reminiscent of our old Marketing Mondays we used to do.
I know.
But Philip, I want to thank you for coming on. Always love having these discussions with you and getting your input and insights from the amusement spaces and how that can then trickle down to haunts and haunt owners and maybe get an idea of where things are headed.
Yeah.
So thanks again for coming on. Thanks again, everybody, for watching. The next Wormhole we're back on schedule, will be 2 weeks from now, so not next week, every Friday or every other Friday. But hey, have a great weekend. It's Mother's Day weekend, so if your mom's still around, go give them a big old hug, say I love you, take her out to eat. Philip, have a great weekend.
Thank you.
And we'll see you all next time.
Today's episode was edited by me, Philip Hernandez, with post-production by David Swope and original music composed by Chris Thomas. Support for today's episode comes from Gantom Lighting and Controls. Gantom illuminates attractions worldwide with the world's smallest intelligent spotlights. From Dark Hour to Netherworld, Super Mario Land to Hagrid's Bike, Gantom goes where other fixtures can't. See what you're missing with a free demo? Sign up at gantom.com/demo. That's gantom.com/demo. The HAN team includes Daryl Plunky, Emily Louise Rua, Megan Spells, Gavin Burns, and Omni Adventures. Until next time, stay scary.
This is a Haunted Attraction Network production.